Welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Agatha.
And we have a new guest joining us for this episode, Gabe.
Hi, everybody.
And in this episode, we're taking to the skies and riding with the angels as we discuss the helicopter action thriller Blue Thunder from 1983.
Roy Scheider is Frank Murphy, a lone wolf.
Freeze! Bozo, how many regulars come in the front door with a key?
Who's about to become a guinea pig.
I thought it was illegal to arm police helicopters.
Well, that would depend on the circumstances, wouldn't it?
Columbia Pictures presents Blue Thunder, a flying arsenal that hears through walls, sees in the dark, and thinks your thoughts.
Wherever you look, the guns follow.
It was designed for war-torn countries.
One civilian dead for every 10 terrorists. That's an acceptable ratio, unless you're one of the civilians.
It was assigned to American cities.
You're talking about crowd control from the air?
That's what this special detail is all about.
They told Murphy to test it. They didn't tell him what it was for.
A dozen of these copters and you could run the whole damn country.
Who was behind it?
Where are we? Federal building.
Really? Hey, you want to find out what's going on in there?
I certainly do.
Hey, you gotta do me a favor. I want you to pick up a package for me.
Why they chose him.
He's totally unsuitable for our purpose.
Don't stop for anything or anybody.
Or why they changed their minds.
Turn the face over, go on fire.
But when Murphy went looking for answers,
Got all this on tape?
I got every word of it.
If it gets back to me, I'll deny it.
the answer came looking for him. They had the ultimate weapon and the perfect plan, but Murphy stole their thunder.
LAPD helicopter pilot Frank Murphy is on the edge. A Vietnam vet haunted by his wartime experiences, his instability has earned him a bad reputation despite his superb piloting skills. Those skills lead government officials to assign him and his rookie partner Lyman Good to help test pilot a prototype military helicopter called Blue Thunder. The fully loaded aircraft includes stealth flying technology, high-tech surveillance equipment, and frighteningly powerful weaponry. But following the murder of a city councilwoman, Murphy and Lyman Good record evidence of a conspiracy to use the device not to combat crime, but to suppress dissent in the population. Now Murphy must fly the chopper in a duel against his fellow police, the military, and his old wartime nemesis to bring the evidence to the authorities. As usual, we'll be discussing Blue Thunder in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the film before listening to the rest of this episode. Blue Thunder was released by Columbia Pictures on May 13th, 1983. It opened against the remake of Breathless. It was shot on a budget of $11 million and made $42 million at the box office, so a pretty solid hit. For awards, it was nominated for the Best Film Editing Oscar at the 1984 Academy Awards, but lost to The Right Stuff, which, I mean, if you're going to lose to a movie, The Right Stuff is pretty damn good. Okay, so what's everybody's first experiences with Blue Thunder?
I will go first because mine will be quick. I saw it for the first time last week and for the second time today.
So had you heard of it before this? Or?
I had known the title. I didn't know what it was about, who was in it, nothing. It was a good experience. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It's not a movie I can take too seriously. I will be sure to pick out some major issues with it, but I had a good time, and sometimes that's all you need out of a film.
Fair enough. Gabe?
I recall seeing this film on VHS tape soon after it was released. I was a freshman in high school, 1984, and it's hard to overstate how much the movie influenced me then. I became very preoccupied with the idea of helicopters, combat helicopters, wanted to be a pilot, obsessively played a video game called Cobra Command at the video arcade, which was a Laserdisc game. In art class, we would have a watercolor project. My watercolor would be a slick helicopter gunship flying over the black night sky of Los Angeles. Can you imagine rendering that with watercolor? Well, I did.
That's tricky, yeah.
Is there evidence?
Do any of these still exist?
Do any of them exist?
I don't think I saved that artifact. Too many moving around since. But I had a belt buckle with Cobra gunships on the buckle. So yeah, this movie was quite influential on me for whatever reason.
Okay, for me, I have a couple different things with this one. The first one was this movie and its derivative TV show was actually the source of a very big Christmas argument in my family. Santa Claus, or as we call her in my household, Polly Claus, would have kind of a setup for the presents. It would be like each person had their own pile and each person had their own type of wrapping paper so you could tell whose present was what. So there was this one big box that was in my wrapping paper, but had fallen off of my pile and was in my little brother's pile. And it turns out that box was the model Blue Thunder action figure thing with all the cool features and everything. I hadn't seen the movie yet, but I had heard of it. And I really wanted that toy. And me and my brother kind of got into a big back and forth about it. Eventually, I just kind of let him have it, and I never got to play with it. And I was always a little bitter about that. But that always kind of stuck in my head. That's the first association I have with Blue Thunder.
Was this Ben?
This was Ben. Yeah.
Now, Tim, as obsessive as I was, I didn't know that there was an actual toy. I had the glued together model kit that I put together.
I'd seen those in stores. Yeah, this was more from the TV show because it had a little James Ferrantino figure that went with it. There were a couple, actually. There was also that one you could stick on the handle and kind of pull the string and it pops up into the air. They had those too. The other association I had before I saw the movie was another video game, Thunderblade. I remember there was an arcade at Liberty Tree Mall, Aladdin's Castle, and it had a giant sit-down version of that thing where you could sit in there and, fly through cities and jungles and things blowing up. And the game was basically designed after this. The helicopter in the game was Blue Thunder. Some of the opening screens of it were actual screenshots from Blue Thunder. There's no way around it. It was Blue Thunder, the game, essentially. So after all that, Blue Thunder was kind of kicking around my head and I'd wanted to see it for years. And then it was on HBO one night. And yeah, I had the same reaction in terms of, wow, this makes me interested in helicopters, makes me want to ride in a helicopter. That's really cool. I really enjoy this movie. Now, as I watch it now, I can see little weird plot flaws and things like that we'll bring up, but I still really enjoy it. I mean, there's so much in here that after how many times I've seen it, the action scenes still really get me going. There are so many stunts and things in here that you just could not do today that I'm like, I can't believe they did that. I have no idea how they did that. But yeah, I really enjoy this film. So starting with that, the helicopter action in this, I mean, this has some of the most amazing helicopter action scenes I've ever seen put to film. I can't think of anything that's pulled off stuff like this before.
I agree. I hadn't either. And some of those stunts took me out of the film a little bit because it looked so dangerous. But that's coming from the point now where I know there's safety features in place. And of course, we have green screen. We have computers that can make some of these stunts look as dangerous as they are, but they are not actually dangerous.
And this is just a little while before the Twilight Zone accident, and that was going to completely change how helicopters were used in movies. After that, you could not get really close to actors. Like when they did Die Hard, they had to composite the actors into any of the scenes with the helicopters flying over. And there is no way in hell this movie could have been made after that. If that accident happened first, they would have just been like, all right, you're doing a lot of blue screen and model work and actors in front of rear projection, which they did for some of this. But there is no way that would have happened otherwise.
Well, they did come out in the same year. The release for Blue Thunder was in May of 1983. And the official release of The Twilight Zone, the movie, was June of the same year.
Yeah.
So they must have filmed at the same time. I'm imagining that the accident didn't have much bearing on Blue Thunder because they were filmed simultaneously.
Twilight Zone filmed in like July of 82, and this one filmed just up to around early spring of 82. Because Warren Oates died like just after they finished filming, and he died in April. So this finished right before the Twilight Zone accident happened.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was pretty close.
Yeah, helicopter chases are kind of a trope of Hollywood movies, but helicopter combat like this is unusual. You'll see it in some Vietnam War movies. Apocalypse Now, Bat 21 is a very good example. But this urban setting is very special.
I mean, Darkman is one of the only other ones I can think of that had a major helicopter action scene in the middle of a city with real helicopters flying between buildings and stuff.
One of the only major helicopter scenes I can remember off the top of my head is from The Running Man. And I'm pretty sure a lot of that was on blue screen or green screen.
A lot of that was actually stock footage from the King Kong remake.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, they took shots from that for a lot of it.
So that kills my theory that The Running Man actually had helicopter stunt work. Not original.
I did like that they used a lot of real life events that happened to helicopter pilots for the police in the movie. Like that whole thing of having a guy shooting at the chopper pilot or going down and, striking up this dust cloud to stop a suspect are apparently things that the writers were told actually happened by helicopter pilots, or some of them actually saw when they were going out with these pilots for research runs. So I kind of like how they work those in the film.
I think there is at least one on-the-record incident of a police helicopter being downed by rifle fire by robbers.
Did like shoot at the rotors or something, or the tail rotor?
Yes. Yeah, I think just damaging those mechanisms.
Because Midnight Run showed to me that if you just shoot the tail rotor of a helicopter, it'll crash. If it's Robert De Niro, at least, he can do it. And one of the things I think that really helps with this movie is that the actors were so game to do so much of it. Like the studio at first wanted to do it all like rear projection, or they actually had John Badham put like the helicopter on the roof of the building and just film the actors there with the helicopter stable. And then after he did that, mostly for safety, he's like, all right, now put him in the helicopter and we'll actually film them in the sky. And Scheider, Daniel Stern, Malcolm McDowell, and we'll get into some of his issues with it later, they were all willing to get in these helicopters and actually buzz around buildings and stuff. And it really, really helps the film. Because I think if they had been in front of a blue screen or a rear projection screen for all of it, it just wouldn't work as well.
I mean, the real thing pretty much always works better than anything we can create. There's just a weight to real things that we haven't quite been able to produce in anything digital. We're not there yet.
And I think some of the reactions from the actors, especially Daniel Stern when they're doing that test flight and diving, and he's just going like, whoa, you can see that he's really in a helicopter that's diving to the ground. I mean, some of it was faked, like any scene with them at night, it was just would have been too complex to shoot, so they actually filmed them in front of a rear projection screen. And despite the fact that the projection plate is shaky because it was shot in a helicopter, it still looks pretty good. But for the most part, yeah, they were just actually in those helicopters flying up there. And they had some disputes over safety, too. It's funny, when they're shooting the big scene where the helicopter is going over the test range, supposedly the special effects guy was like, should we really be setting these explosives off so close to the helicopter? And the helicopter guy's like, yeah, we need to go higher. And since that's the very thing that caused the Twilight Zone accident, it's like, I'm glad they were a lot more responsible about it than John Landis was. So
they did listen to the experts and film further away.
Yeah, Jim Gavin, who was the helicopter pilot, made the effects guy, show me the explosion, show me how big it's going to be, and then like, no, that's too big, tone that down.
Good.
As for some of the themes of the movie, the big one that I think this movie was really prescient on is police militarization, the idea of police actually getting military-style equipment to use.
Yes.
Indeed, it may be purely coincidental, but the one realm where a rule against police militarization is held is with aircraft. They don't actually mount weapons on police aircraft. Police have shot small arms out of police aircraft, and in the MOVE incident in Philadelphia, they dropped an incendiary device from a police helicopter. But that's the one red line that hasn't been crossed yet according to FAA rules.
And something I think that's actually brought up in the movie, Murphy mentions is at one point of like it being illegal to arm helicopters and that people wouldn't like this. Yeah. But we've seen it. If you give police really high-tech weaponry, they're going to find a chance to use it, whether, it's really justified or not. And considering that becomes an element of this story is that these government guys trying to justify a reason to use this horrible stuff against the population, it's a little creepy.
But the beginning of the movie lays it out for us. The Olympics are coming. The world is going to be looking at LA and the crime issue. It's a major issue even now, but for this movie to come out and say, crowd control, we're using some war techniques. We're going to be in the air. It's punchy. It's no nonsense. Any criminal they think is going to come to LA to mess with them because there's going to be a lot of money because the Olympics are there, they might be deterred. So this is going to help raise LA in the profile of the world.
Yeah, they mentioned the Munich massacre specifically. I know something of the Munich massacre. It's hard to visualize how Blue Thunder, at least with its 20 millimeter cannon, would factor into a situation like that. That would be too destructive a weapon to deal with the hostage situation that they were facing in Munich.
Absolutely.
Well, I think of Fletcher going like, yeah, 1 hostage dead for every 10 terrorists. Good enough ratio. So I can imagine they were thinking Blue Thunder, seeing through walls, because, oh, there's a terrorist. Boom, shoot him through the wall. You hit a couple hostages. Oh, well, oops.
And it's funny because I didn't read Blue Thunder as hostage situations. I read that as an excuse for crowd control, even though they kind of hedged around it. We know they were going into certain neighborhoods, aka poverty-stricken neighborhoods, and going to the source of what they consider the problem, the slums, or not white areas, and getting rid of the problem. This has nothing to do with making sure that there wasn't a sniper or that there wasn't a terrorist. This is mainly to get rid of people who they consider undesirables.
And even worse, this idea that they're going into these minority neighborhoods and stirring up crime, causing it to happen so they have a chance to use this thing.
Right. They're manufacturing a bigger issue so that there's enough heat coming down from the government so they can use this new technology.
This is one of the ways in which Blue Thunder might be a more relevant movie today than it was when it first came out. After the riots of the 1960s, certain elements of this country's political leadership really gleefully leveraged that to get political power. And we've had recent events in America where, again, there's been some disorder and destruction during protest, and certain elements of our political leadership seem to be, with great glee and relish, leveraging it to try to gain power. That's the political angle of Blue Thunder. It's not presented in the most sophisticated way, and it might have seemed a bit ham-fisted in the 1980s when this wasn't really a pressing issue. We were more concerned with things like drugs.
But because it was ham-handed, an audience who was not ready for any subtlety in this particular issue, they get it. It doesn't have to be an undercurrent or a couple of code words here and there. They need it just yelled at them. This is happening because they want to get rid of minorities. They might be saying that it's all about terrorism or that it is all about being tough on crime, and it's a power grab. So that power grab needs to be blatant at this point in cinema, I think. Especially since, like you said, this was more of a ground war on drugs issue.
And it's also an action movie that's kind of bringing in audiences who might not really be tuned for a political message movie. So yeah, you kind of have to hit them over the head sometimes with that.
Although I would love to see this remade with more subtlety in the script.
Well, they're supposedly working on that, so we'll see.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, at this time when everything seems to be getting a reboot, a reimagining, a remake, it's amazing what a latent property Blue Thunder is.
I know.
If made now, Blue Thunder would absolutely be a movie that would frighten people, not just for what it's showing could happen, but possibly giving people an idea to do it.
Well, if they had a helicopter with that kind of technology.
I mean, we've seen some pretty scary technology come out of nowhere. I don't find it in the realm of disbelief that there is someone out there who can build a helicopter on their own and get it moving.
All right, that's fair. That's the scary thing, imagining what this device would be used for during like a Black Lives Matter protest or something. It would be awful. One of the other big elements, and it's funny since they mentioned the Olympics that were in 1984, is surveillance, of course. The idea that this helicopter can spy on pretty much anybody and record anybody, even if they're inside, even if they think they're hidden away, it can capture everything they say and do. And the film doesn't do too much with that. I think it's interesting that there's the threat of this device being used for that, but instead our heroes turn it against the guys who want to use it for that by recording them and all of their dirty deeds, which I think is kind of cool.
I hate to spoil that in any way, but I recently had a brief conversation with a National Guard helicopter pilot. He was familiar with the movie, and I asked him if anything jumped out in his recollection. He said that infrared could not be used to look through glass windows.
No.
The heat would reflect. You would just get a blank image.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, yeah. Also, the fact that this movie has the microphones right under the propeller blades. I mean, you're not going to hear anything except propeller. That makes no sense to me. Why not put it on the bottom of the helicopter?
I suppose whisper mode is supposed to cure that problem, but...
With the vibration? Yeah, I don't know if that would work. Yeah. We have enough trouble getting us to show up on, recorded mic here. I can't imagine trying to get somebody in a building mounted on a helicopter.
It's special technology. It's revealed this is all aliens.
There you go. One thing I was wondering about this, if this movie was also playing on the whole black helicopter conspiracy theory, this idea that there are black helicopters everywhere that are monitoring and that we're responsible for cattle mutilations and that the government's actually using to control the population. I feel like this movie is kind of intentionally playing into that to some degree.
This is not a conspiracy theory I'm familiar with.
It's kind of become almost a joke now that, when somebody says something that's ridiculous, somebody will say, oh, and next you'll say there's black helicopters following you. It's kind of one of the notorious ones. If you've seen the movie Conspiracy Theory, they mention it a whole bunch of times in there and actually kind of do several jokes based on it.
Yeah, I think that drone technology has overtaken any fear of a manned platform conducting the surveillance now.
Yeah.
That is very true.
Scarier because they're smaller and quieter.
Now let's talk a little bit about the origins of the movie. The film started off as a spec screenplay by the amazing Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby. O'Bannon is probably best known for writing the original Alien, and for me, he'll always be Sergeant Pinback from Dark Star. He also co-wrote Dead and Buried, Heavy Metal, Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and directed Return of the Living Dead and The Resurrected. Jacoby worked with O'Bannon on Life Force and Invaders from Mars. He also contributed to The Philadelphia Experiment, Arachnophobia, John Carpenter's Vampires, and Evolution, and he actually wrote several episodes of the TV show. And their original script is fascinating because it's extraordinarily different, but a lot of the elements they put in there were warped into the film we have now, because their original script is essentially Taxi Driver in the Air. Frank Murphy is truly insane and psychotic. He's asked to test pilot this, and he sees it as his chance to fulfill this weird delusion he has that he is the god Thor reincarnated, and he's going to punish crime and evil by destroying it all in LA.
That is a totally different movie. That feels almost like it would be in the tone of Platoon.
And then in that one, you have the Cochran character, the Malcolm McDowell character, is actually a good guy who's trying to stop him and doesn't quite understand why he's doing it. He thinks that Murphy is trying to sell Blue Thunder to terrorists. He doesn't get that he's full-blown psychotic. But it's almost like a mass shooting in the air, basically. Murphy is like dropping grenades on people. He's blowing up freeways. It's pretty scary. I think it's interesting that if you look at the movie poster for the movie, it seems like the copy for it was written when they were still going to do their original story, because it is all about this guy's up in the air. He has this killer helicopter. He's coming to threaten your life, and only one man can stop him. It's like, that sounds a lot more like that screenplay than the feature film. And I'll admit, if they ever remake it, I kind of wish they'd go back to that concept, because it really plugs in the whole idea of if you give military hardware to the police, bad things are going to happen.
That original screenplay could do a podcast all itself. I got to tell you, people,
It really
if
could.
you want to read something wild and woolly, and you can find that script, I recommend it to you. Blue Thunder, they get an R rating by having a very artful and tasteful nude scene, which, is what you had to do at the time. And the original script, in which Murphy is like a Charles Whitman character from the Texas Tower shooting, I think would be the reference point. He has a girlfriend, and she accurately confronts him with the fact that he's sexually impotent. And then she goes and participates in the shooting of an adult movie, a pornographic movie, that his helicopter team is supposed to be surveilling for the Vice Squad. And so his fellow police officers see this situation unfolding with her. And I think the implication is that his sexual humiliation drives him into this violent outburst.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he has this weird white knight obsession with trying to track down and kill this rapist. And I think when that opportunity is taken away from him, that adds to it as well, that he didn't get a chance to punish evil personally. And
Deeply Freudian works, dear.
And there are some scenes that startled me with how relevant they are. There's a scene where they're following this black jogger who's just trying to get home from the helicopter and harassing him with the light and just following close by him and just won't leave him alone for no reason other than he's black. And I'm like, wow, it's amazing to see this in a script in the early 80s.
Yeah, I think the original script was dated 1979, I think. And so it's like the Jimmy Carter ennui, the hostage crisis. America was really down in the dumps. And then the next script is during the Reagan era and reflects a very different view of everything.
Yeah, the studio, they didn't like the lead. They loved all the helicopter action, so they thought, can we twist it around to make him the good guy? So it is interesting that the movie turns from, okay, police can't be trusted with this firepower to, no, the cops are the good guys. It's the federal government. They're the ones we can't trust. And it becomes more this sort of post-Watergate conspiracy thriller idea.
Yeah, it's the deep state before people started throwing that word around.
And for that part, they brought Dean Reisner, a screenwriter who's known for doing a lot of Clint Eastwood movies like Coogan's Bluff, Play Misty for Me, Dirty Harry, The Enforcer. And he was the one who did the main switch to turn Murphy into the good guy and the government into the bad guys. But there are some elements that hang over, like the whole thing that with the original Murphy's obsession with thinking he's Thor, and then they decide to use that as the code name for the project, the evil helicopter
Which
project.
he is
obsessed
with.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool that they still managed to keep it in there. Or in the original script, Murphy's obsessed with numeric patterns and these weird patterns that he thinks he's seeing. And you hear Murphy in this movie every once in a while mention patterns, but it just sounds more like his streetwise knowledge about how crime works. Even things like the climactic full loop that Murphy can do in the helicopter, that's how he kills Cochran in the original script. And in there, it's like, oh my God, this is horrible. And here it's like, yay, the hero is pulled off. Yay.
And just to be clear, that is not possible with a helicopter, correct?
There are some helicopters they've made since then that can do it, because I've
Okay.
seen it done. Not with the helicopter he's flying.
No.
In fact, when they did it for the movie, they actually had to use a little tiny radio-controlled model to pull off that shot.
They do reveal that there is sort of a sordid dynamic inside of this police culture where they will surveil people for cheap thrills.
There are a lot of violations of privacy going on and used for laughs.
And that's the thing. In the original script, that whole thing with the actress was another example of, oh my God, these guys are awful. And here it's kind of like weird Animal House hijinks. It feels a little strange. Right.
That first act is, I would call it a cop buddy movie. You know, it follows a very set formula of they go out on a patrol. It's eventful, and they also find a little time to be naughty. And then they come back, and of course they get chewed out by their superior just as they are coming on to the real mystery.
Did they get fired, though? That would have been the next beat.
Well, they got grounded,
they
so
did get
it's kind of
grounded.
close, you know?
Another thing that jumps out at me on watching is this movie has a fair amount of foreshadowing in it. Lyman Good loses his papers, and they're blown away in the opening scene, and then later the same things happens to the councilwoman when she's attacked. The scene of Murphy and Katie and her son going to the train museum foreshadows the train collision at the end. And that is also the exact same spot that was used in the parallax view, where the hero in that show gets on a little kid's train with one of his contacts to arrange his assistance.
Interesting. Let's move on to the director, John Badham, who he's another director I don't think gets a lot of credit, but he's another one who has an incredibly varied filmography. He can do action, he can do drama, horror. He's best known for Saturday Night Fever, but he also did the Frank Langella version of Dracula, Whose Life Is It Anyway, with Richard Dreyfuss, the euthanasia drama, which is very good but really tough to watch. After this, he'd go on to War Games, Short Circuit, Stakeout End Sequel, Bird on a Wire, Point of No Return, Nick of Time, just a lot of interesting stuff. He tended to move in like thriller mode, but he could do a lot of different styles of film.
Interesting that he did Nick of Time. That was an assassination thriller.
Yes.
Yeah, the one told in real time, yeah. And particularly with this film, in the middle of the 80s, he kind of made this sort of trilogy of movies about technology gone wrong or misused by the government. You start off with this one. His next film after this was War Games, which is the same thing, this AI technology used for nuclear war deterrent, and that goes horribly wrong. And then after that, Short Circuit, where you have a robot that's turned into a weapon and decides it doesn't want to be. So it's interesting to see the themes that run through all three of these ones, where you usually have a lone character or a small group of characters standing against the authorities and trying to stop this technology from being misused.
I don't know if this is where to say it, but Blue Thunder is an interesting movie to look at in terms of its genres and subgenres, because it's very clearly it's a thriller and an action movie. It also has the subgenre of the conspiracy thriller. I think one of the writers called a Watergate thriller. To me, it stands out as the premier example of a technothriller, which is a thriller that's organized around the use of cutting-edge technology. And the movie Firefox with Clint Eastwood came out just a year before. You can see a number of parallels between those two films. The novel Hunt for Red October came out a year after, and that would later be turned into one of the more famous techno-thriller Hollywood movies. And Blue Thunder is sitting there in sort of a liminal state between these trends in genre.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. I've been trying to think of other techno-thrillers that sort of fit that mold. You mentioned Black Moon Rising when we were watching the movie. That's definitely another one.
Well, I mean, we can go as far as The Conversation and the idea of fear of surveillance and little pieces of technology. The smaller they get, the harder they're to find, the scarier it is.
Certainly the shotgun mic in that movie was sort of the cutting edge technology that everyone's like, they can really do that?
Right.
Oh my God, yeah.
One movie that I would compare Blue Thunder to is Black Sunday with Bruce Dern.
Yep.
And that's another story of a troubled pilot who saw bad experiences in the Vietnam War and sets out to be a vindicator. It's much in keeping with the original Blue Thunder script, the Black Sunday story.
While also showing the kind of event that Iceland claims that they want to use Blue Thunder to prevent.
That's true. Blue Thunder would have come in handy.
Yep. Boom, boom. There. Situation all set. Bye. All right, going back to Badham, he actually does have a cameo in the movie. He's the TV director in the first newsroom scene, the guy wearing the yellow shirt. He said he was smart enough to not give himself any dialogue.
There are some directors who I wish would also take that into account. Just don't.
I agree. It would definitely be for the best. Let's move on to the cast, and right up front we have Roy Scheider as Frank Murphy. Murphy does kind of play as this embodiment of sort of the post-Vietnam veteran. He's traumatized, injured physically, we're told, certainly psychologically by what he saw and was made to participate in, and trying to sort of readjust himself to civilian life while dealing with the trauma that he keeps to himself. That was more of a running theme in the original screenplay, that he doesn't really tell anybody what it was that he saw in the war until the very end. But as played by Scheider is just so good at playing these kind of blue-collar hero types. We saw it in Jaws. We see it even in like 2010, where he turns Haywood Floyd from this government NASA scientist into a little bit more of a blue-collar everyman. And he's just so good at that.
He does play that role very well, especially in this era. He was in, what was it, DSV?
Sequest, yeah.
Sequest, yes. And I felt the same thing even then. He was very much just a guy that people can relate to.
Which for a science fiction show, or even a techno-thriller like this, I think is important to have.
Definitely.
There is a major part of the screenplay that's missing that I really wish they had kept in there, where we actually found out what his Vietnam flashback meant. And it was this idea that they were taking up North Vietnamese people into these helicopters, and they would take two at the same time, push one of them out, and then interrogate the other one and threaten to push him out if he didn't tell them what they wanted, and then usually push him out anyway. And Murphy supposedly saw this, was horrified by it, refused to participate, and then was going to be court-martialed until he was injured. And I feel like taking that out, it leaves it a little mysterious. You can tell they're trying to play it as maybe Murphy is the guy who pushed this guy out of the helicopter until we see the full flashback and see that it was Cochran. But I feel like taking it out, first of all, it removes Cochran's big motivation that he wants to get rid of Murphy because he knows Murphy's not going to be the guy who's bloodthirsty enough to use the helicopter the way they want. But I feel like it takes something away from the character that he never really gets the chance to verbalize that. There was a great scene in the script where he would actually tell Kate what had happened, and it's the first time he trusts anybody with this trauma that he's been through. And I really wish they had kept that in there.
I think that one of the unfortunate things that happened in the production of Blue Thunder is that the role of female characters was diminished. In the first instance, Murphy in the screenplay has a scene with a female psychologist or psychiatrist, and she's obviously part of the deep state conspiracy, trying to get him disqualified on mental health testing grounds. And based on the featurette, that scene was actually filmed, but they decided not to use it. The second thing that happens is when he does open up to Katie in the script and tells her exactly what happened in Vietnam, why he thinks something fishy is going on, that's entirely removed.
And there was a little postscript that kind of justified the scene with Kate looking for him in the apartment and finding him having nightmares in her son's bedroom, where we would have come back to a scene at the end back at her house, and now he's sleeping peacefully. And again, it kind of takes away, this is a guy who's found peace finally. Maybe it's for the best, because I do think Scheider kind of sells it in that last shot where he's walking away from the wreck of Blue Thunder with that little smile on his face.
Yeah, that original ending where they're sort of united together as a family in the script. I believe that Murphy doesn't destroy the helicopter. He lands it at a sports stadium, and so it's not destroyed in an explosion.
That brings to mind a question, because I've heard this from other viewers. It didn't work this way for me, but I've heard it. Did you think that when Murphy is putting Blue Thunder down in front of the train that he's committing suicide for a second? Because I've heard some people interpret that, now it's your turn line, that he's talking to himself, not the helicopter.
I absolutely thought he was ready to end it as well. Pleasantly surprised that he chose not to. It would have been a very bleak ending, but it would have been character appropriate.
It's funny because that's an ending that would have fit the original screenplay, where he's a psychopath a lot more, I think, than this one. But it's interesting to view it in that sense, that there's a moment where you think, oh my God, is he about to kill himself with this helicopter?
Definitely that was intended dramatic tension.
Yeah.
I had a problem with that explosion. In fact, I had a problem with most of the explosions. This is a movie where we're supposed to be rooting for the guy who is making planes crash into buildings and who destroys a helicopter. And I agree the helicopter should be destroyed, but maybe not in front of a moving train with possibly people inside. At least the operator of the train is inside. It's just reckless with the lives of other people coming from a guy who is trying to prevent harm to other people. So I can't quite reconcile that.
Yeah, Murphy is pretty reckless in that regard. He is oftentimes putting people at risk. Certainly the guys in the barbecue shack, I kind of wish they had included a little bit of him using the loudspeaker to tell everybody to evacuate the building before the missile hit.
Agreed.
That would have helped a little bit. But yeah, he is taking chances. And yes, I know it's the F-16's missiles that are doing it, not him. But he is definitely still putting people at risk. And that is directly out of the original screenplay. And it works a lot better where you have a psychotic guy who doesn't really care about the people he's putting into danger's way.
Yeah, there is a news announcement coda to the movie in which no loss of life is mentioned in the train crash. So I think we take it that it didn't actually result in a death, but it certainly is alarming.
I will say also, being the armored helicopter as it is, that thing just explodes instantly like it's made out of newspaper and sticks.
Yeah, they made a full-size balsa wood model of Blue Thunder just to blow it up.
Just the way it explodes, it's just like... it's a little hard to buy. It's this heavily armored military copter that doesn't have that much fuel in it anymore, and it blows up like that. When he flinches at the end when the helicopter explodes, that was not intended, but man, I love it. It just feels like such a beautiful human moment that, he doesn't walk off like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He does that giant flinch like, oh, wow, that was louder than I thought it was going to be.
I would like to know what the first movie was that used the trope of not looking back at the explosion.
I'm really not sure. I don't know. I always imagine all these action heroes have their back completely burnt or like black and soot like a cartoon character whenever they do that.
And it often would seem to make you seem suspicious if you're the only person walking calmly away from an explosion that everyone else is staring at in jaw-dropped shock.
It's one of my favorite jokes in Violent Night when he sets up a grenade to kill a bad guy. He's walking away. He's like, no, wait, I got to see this, and turns around and watches it blow up. Scheider was actually an Air Force veteran, and he had some experience with aircraft. And while the choppers in the movie had concealed pilots, he did get to work the pedals and occasionally help with takeoff and landing. And as we'll get into later, actually is flying the Blue Thunder helicopter in one shot in the movie due to a near accident that they had. We'll get into that in a little bit. Supposedly, while shooting the scene where the helicopter crashes in the Watts district, Scheider would be sitting on set undressed working on his tan. And I got to talk about this. Scheider is a very tan actor.
He is. Well, this was the era where people were worshiping the sun. So we have a lot of actors around that time who aged prematurely in appearance because they had damaged their skin so bad in the 70s. So this is just indicative of the time.
There's something about that quality, and it's in all of his movies that always makes him seem like this wiry, tough guy that he has such tan skin. I just think he looks like he's made out of leather. It's kind of awesome, frankly.
Scheider jerky.
Badham comments on that. This was before people got quite so panicky about skin cancer from sun exposure, telling Scheider that he was going to turn himself into a crocodile bag or something.
Scheider's headache acting in this movie is great. He's constantly kind of rubbing his temples, and there's one moment early on in the film when Lyman Good is leaving Braddock's office and slams the door, and you can see Scheider just kind of reach to his head like, oh, my head. I never noticed it before this viewing. It's really good. It's a really nice little detail.
Another interesting note is that the script makes a very specific point of Murphy drinking a kind of milk called acidophilus milk or something. I don't know.
Acidophilus.
Yes, which is like a buttermilk.
Yes, it's like a probiotic.
Right, and you can barely see it in the film, but you can see it if you watch very closely, and it's a kind of milk of someone who's having digestive problems or upset stomach would be likely to drink.
Which, given the reference to a sucking chest wound, is a really nice detail then, that his injury has caused him to have to drink stuff like this and take it easy on his stomach. That's a really nice touch. Scheider's partner in the film is Daniel Stern playing Richard Lyman Good. Now Stern, he's best known for comedic movies like Breaking Away, especially the Home Alone movies as one of the Wet Bandits and City Slickers. And this is kind of before he was really known for comedy. He had done Breaking Away, and that's kind of what got him the attention to be in this. And the character is definitely there to serve as our entryway into the movie. He's the one we learn about Murphy through and all of the Astro Division procedures, and then segues into becoming the comedic sidekick. And by the time they're like peeking down women's dresses with the camera, Stern is really playing up, what a goofball this guy is, and I kind of love it.
You can see the character opening up.
Yeah, that he's finally getting more comfortable with Murphy and kind of feeling like he belongs here, and it's kind of nice.
I don't know if we'll ever know the true Lyman Good, because I think that he clearly wants to fit in and ingratiate himself with the Astro unit. And it's interesting that he begins the movie by saying, I didn't want to be the kind of cop who kicks in doors and pulls guns on people. And that's what he was looking for.
He was so excited to find out what his hat meant. I loved it.
And then hearing he was a Navy man, which I thought was kind of an interesting surprise when I first saw this. Although once you find out he was a tech guy, it's like, okay, that makes a little more sense. He's the tech nerd. And he's the one who's definitely more interested in all the weird tech gadgets that Blue Thunder has more than Murphy is, who just seems to want to fly the thing. Then midway through the movie, where he gets fridged when the bad guys run him over, that's brutal. I mean, the fact that he's this kind of charming comic character, to have him killed that way really gives the movie an extra kick into the third act.
It does. Yeah, usually you have somebody there for comic relief, and maybe you have someone there to be sacrificed to motivate the hero's revenge mission. But it's not typically the same person, and here it was. Especially after seeing his fingers get broken, and then he dies in such a horrible, if quick way. It's just like, that's rough.
And I like that while Lyman Good's a rookie, we see he's not an idiot. Like, he proves himself to be pretty good during that initial flight, seeing that second robber and putting him out to the police and saving them from getting shot. His Navy background and his knowledge of the tape becomes really important. He's able to get it out of there and change the code and prevent them from erasing it. So he's not incompetent. That said, the character makes a couple mistakes that really I have no way to explain. So it's put into agonizing detail that these tapes only erase inside the case. Lyman Good steals the tape and changes the code. Why didn't he just pull it out of the case?
Indeed, I suppose since he was storing it in rough conditions, he probably thought that leaving the case would preserve it, whereas having it out loose might expose it to danger. I don't know. It is a question.
I think that it's there for dramatic effect. It's supposed to give us a lot of tension. When is this tape going to come out of its case?
It's weird because there's a line in there, it only erases inside the case, and you can hear Lyman go, "It erases inside the case, that's amazing," and it's clearly looped in. So I don't know if they added that later to make sure that plot point was clear to the audience, and maybe Lyman Good wasn't supposed to be aware of it, and then we, the audience, would find out after, and that's why, and so it's just lucky that it gets pulled out of the case at the newsroom, but it just seems like such a bizarre misstep on his part. And also, the government's after you. You've stolen this tape with very dangerous information. Would you go home after that? I wouldn't.
It seems like this is the time when two buddy cops should stick together.
Yes.
And
Agreed.
not go their separate ways.
At the very least, get a hotel room, pay cash, put a fake name, hide out quietly for a while until you can get in contact with Murphy. I also can't figure out exactly how he got that recording into Blue Thunder. Did he go back after he took the tape later and sneak into the cockpit and record that? Because he didn't seem like he would have had time to do it before he steals the tape or when he steals the tape. So that's a little bit weird too.
I have no response because I agree with you. It is strange, and it's a plot contrivance. We have those with movies, and some of them we let go, and some of them we get very upset about. This is one I'm letting go.
It's just, the tape case one is such a big one. I'm just like, if you're going to make that much drama out of it, just take it out of the friggin' case. Next we have Candy Clark playing Kate, Murphy's girlfriend. I think it's kind of a pleasant surprise that she's actually a pretty strong character for a movie in the 80s. She doesn't become the damsel in distress. Her rather insane driving ability saves the day. She's smart enough to not give the tape to Fletcher at the TV station. She manages to avoid a lot of the pitfalls you'd expect from this kind of character in this era.
And she's a fantastic driver under pressure, and somehow also has time to raise her child. She really should be the lead character when it comes down to it, or at least the co-lead, because she has so much to do in the film, and I feel like she gets shunted aside a little bit, except for those moments, making sure that the tape didn't get into the wrong hands. And
it's another reason I wish we had a little bit more of her relationship with Murphy in those scenes that they cut out, because I think that would have helped a little bit. It's one of the few things with this character that doesn't work, is her relationship with Murphy, especially in that first scene, is really weird. We get the sense their relationship is over, but then like 2 minutes later, she's kind of like, all right, it's time to get tough. We have to really get this relationship going.
But I feel like this is their game. They're always going to be pushing and pulling, and I think they both enjoy it. I think they both like the game. She knows he can be hard to reach emotionally and physically because he does not answer his phone. But she'll pursue, and she'll pull back, and she'll, yeah, we're breaking up. Sure. Yeah. Okay. What are we having for dinner?
I do kind of miss in the script, there was a great line where Murphy talks about one of their fights where she threw a chicken at him, like threw it spiral like a football player. That image, I think, was just kind of amazing.
Yeah, her character brought to mind the phrase ride or die.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that what stands out about her is that she trusts Murphy to this extraordinary degree, even more than any love or affection. She actually believes that if he says, you have to get this object to this television station, she believes him and she's on board with him. And this isn't just some crazy paranoid thing he's trying to get her to do, but she accepts that that is a legitimate emergency that she has to take on trust, because they didn't have the establishing scene in the original script.
See, I think the reason for that is she was really impressed with that tablecloth that she gets. She was so knocked out by that, she's like, I'll do anything for this guy. I will run from the police with this tape and get it wherever. That's fine, because that was a nice tablecloth. Because that seems to be the moment that the relationship is over. Oh, look at this tablecloth. Oh, I love it. And she throws it over him and kisses him. So that tablecloth did a lot of the legwork in their relationship.
On rewatching the movie, when you know that Murphy has this fine human being so devoted to him, and he comes swaggering in from that initial helicopter mission where they stop the liquor store robbery. And then he sort of flirts with a female officer very briefly in the command room. It shows him to be a little bit of a scoundrel.
Yeah, a little bit. And Clark brings this weird, quirky quality to it that she really feels like she came out of a romantic comedy. And I kind of love that, because then once she's in danger, it makes it a lot scarier. If she was this really tough survivor type, it wouldn't be as interesting when she's suddenly running from the police. Seeing a character who feels much more comedic who's in that situation, it's like, oh my God, they're in trouble now. What's going to happen to them?
Yeah, I think the way she resists the short con attempt of the CIA professional who's been sent to fool her and intercept her just shows she's a good judge of character. She can sense when there's a slimy character, and she can sense in Murphy the good character.
Yeah, she has that pause of, no, I don't think so. I got to take it just to the guy directly. She follows the orders that Murphy gave her, and it's the right move, yeah.
These are leading me to think that there's a different sort of relationship at play here.
How so?
Well, I mean, she obeys him without question to the letter. This seems like a little more than your standard trust.
I think it's because now she knows Lyman Good is dead. She might even know that Murphy is suspected in it. So I think she realizes what the stakes are based on that. As for Clark herself, she had previously appeared in Fat City, American Graffiti, where she got an Oscar nomination for supporting actress, The Man Who Fell to Earth, Cat's Eye, and The Blob, and Cool as Ice, that film epic. And she's just really great here. She also apparently did some of her own stunt driving. You can see there are shots where you can see it's her in the car driving, even like in the rearview mirror, and that the car's not being towed. And she scared the hell out of Badham, who was like in the car filming those scenes with her. So some of that is really her, and I give huge kudos to her. Next, we have Warren Oates as Captain Braddock in, sadly, one of his last screen roles, the last one he actually filmed. Now, there's no getting around the fact that Braddock functions as pretty much the stereotypical gruff police captain. He's there to yell at the guys when they go too far, and he practically does the, give me your badge kind of scene. And yet, in any other scene, he's also quietly defending them against the government guy. So it is kind of a cliche, but the fact that it's Warren Oates playing it really helps push past a lot of that, because Oates is just so goddamn funny and has just amazing screen presence.
I think it's fair to say that Warren Oates does get the best lines, and he deserves to get the best lines.
Supposedly, a lot of takes were blown because Roy Scheider just burst out laughing at the way he would deliver some of them, especially that whole thing about, if I don't have an ass when I get out of this chair, it's because the old man chewed it off like that. That one apparently really broke him up.
It is a great delivery. Him
yelling at Lyman Good is one of my favorites. I had years in this office when your idea of a good time was sitting in front of a TV watching Bugs Bunny gnawing on your bicycle. Such an amazing delivery.
I got a little kick out of the fact that Oates was in a movie that was very different, but that had a couple of similarities to Blue Thunder, and that was Stripes with Bill Murray.
That's true.
Where the super vehicle is not a helicopter gunship in that film, but a reworked recreational RV with super armor that's able to invade a Cold War East Bloc military base and rescue Warren Oates. With Bill Murray at the wheel.
And he has the same antagonistic relationship with Bill Murray there. Oates is a legendary tough guy actor who worked a lot with Sam Peckinpah. He's famous for working with him in The Wild Bunch and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, as well as being in the Heat of the Night, Tulane Blacktop, Dillinger, Badlands. As you mentioned, Sergeant Hulka from Stripes. That's where most people remember him. This was the last film he shot. He passed away from a heart attack a month after shooting, but it was actually his second to last film released, as both this and the previously filmed Tough Enough were released after he died. The film's dedicated to him as a result, and what a loss, because he's one of those actors, kind of like Robert Duvall, that anything he says in a movie, it's like, yep, I buy it. I totally believe it. I believe that this guy is who he seems to be. And I like how in the original script, Braddock had such faith in Murphy. He was totally sticking up for him, and Murphy was a psychopath. Here, having him have this faith in Murphy that he'd protect him from the government, and it turns out that Murphy is right, it's like his faith was justified. It shows that, a lot like Kate, he has a really good sense of character. Next, there's Malcolm McDowell as Cochran. This was the first movie I ever saw Malcolm McDowell in, because I obviously didn't get to see Clockwork Orange when I was a kid, so this was what I knew him from for a while.
Mine was Time After Time, though.
Oh, see, you get an entirely different sense of Malcolm McDowell from that.
I mean, Malcolm McDowell, until I did see Clockwork Orange as a young teen, Malcolm McDowell was always kind of a heartthrob figure, a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, he's gonna go rescue this lady through time. Woo! So that was definitely a different take on McDowell.
And in this film, he comes to personify the military mentality that the use of force is justified and any unethical steps are completely necessary. It says something that these government guys assume that the police force in general would be totally cool with this. We'll give these guys this high-tech toy and they'll shoot a bunch of people and it'll be great. It says kind of a lot about their views on the police force and maybe just the police force in general.
He is the kind of villain who could be put into a Animal House type comedy without much change, I think. He has his silly little catch you later phrase.
Hate that phrase.
Which made more sense in the original script where he and Murphy had no prior relationship. But here it is where they, share this deep, dark secret about Vietnam War crimes.
I'm still trying to figure out what it meant that his war record was changed so he was sole survivor of a bunch of incidents. They never really explained that little detail, and I didn't know what that meant. Or, for that matter, why Murphy's file is under repair.
I think Murphy's file was under repair because they were going to plant something in there to justify what they wanted to do.
Okay, that could be. So maybe it's the opposite with Cochran trying to portray himself as this Rambo-type hero who was the only survivor.
I don't recall if they said sole survivor for the incident we witnessed in his flashback.
We never find out.
But I totally believe that Cochran manipulated a situation in which he was the only survivor because he made it certain he was the only one left so that he didn't have to talk about something. He's bad enough that I would fully believe he would turn on the rest of his company.
Yeah. Murphy has a line, though. It's like, sole survivor, who is he kidding? Which seems to imply he's lying about some of these, or that they faked this somehow, which I don't quite get what that's supposed to mean.
Or perhaps it's just information that's taking Murphy by surprise also.
Maybe. This is kind of a big inflection point for McDowell's career in terms of this is when he really starts playing villains, and not like the Alex DeLarge interesting anti-heroes, but just kind of stock villains in movies. Because from here on, I mean, he did Clockwork Orange and Cat People, and those are more interesting characters. After this, he's playing villains in movies like Sunset, Moon 44, Star Trek Generations, Tank Girl, which aren't quite as deep or as interesting as his previous roles. And I think this is sort of the beginning of that.
Am I mistaken, or was he in Caligula?
He was in Caligula, yep.
And did that predate this movie?
That was before this, yeah.
Okay.
I will say, though, McDowell gives the most amazing performance in the film for the simple fact of he hated flying, and he particularly hated flying in helicopters. And when he signed up to be in this movie, his agent had assured him he was just going to be able to do rear projection. And the first scene in Blue Thunder we see, it's just McDowell in front of rear projection. But once he saw Scheider and Stern jumping into helicopters, he felt pressure to do the same. The first time apparently he got in one is that scene near the end of the movie where he jumps in the helicopter and we see it take off in one shot. And it did that. It landed back down. He got out of the helicopter and immediately threw up. And yet, you see him in the helicopter doing some really crazy maneuvers. And it's funny because there are shots where you can see he's really nearly sick to his stomach, but somehow McDowell turns it into like psychotic rage and makes it work for the character. And it's kind of amazing.
Indeed. It appears that there is a minor editing difference in versions of the film because in one, Cochran is taking off on an unauthorized mission after the F-16 attacks have failed. And the leadership has decided they're not going to do any more air attacks on Blue Thunder. He takes his gunship up. The tower is telling him he is not cleared to do this. And he says, thank you. But it's missing from the version we watched.
I wish the thank you had been there.
Yeah, it's on the TV version. For some reason, it's lost in the mix of the Blu-ray. And there's a couple other audio discrepancies, too, apparently, like that. But yeah, it's really a nice little moment of just like, screw you, I'm taking it anyway. But he still does it with that British politeness.
It does show how just the slightest change can have a big effect on the scene.
And he was not the original actor that John Badham wanted for this movie. Badham originally wanted Australian actor Brian Brown from FX and Cocktail, and he was all set, and then there was a scheduling thing, and Brown had to drop out, and McDowell filled in. I do think it's interesting that he's this American military guy, and yet he's extraordinarily British. I like that they don't make McDowell try to cover his British accent, but I want to kind of know the backstory. Is he like a naturalized citizen? Was he poached from the British military? We never find out.
Yeah, that puzzled me also. I know that, the Vietnam War wasn't just American soldiers in Vietnam, but there were soldiers from South Korea, Taiwan. According to the Ken Burns documentary, as I recall, it's something like 50,000 Canadians served as volunteers for the U.S. Army in the Vietnam War. Australia had a heavy presence. And my hypothesis is that Cochran probably came in under the auspices of Australia's force and then became part of a team with Murphy. But that's all hypothetical on my part.
It actually would have made a lot of sense with them trying to get Brian Brown to play the role. So yeah, that actually makes quite a bit of sense. Oh, and something else I wanted to bring up in relation to both Murphy and Cochran. I love that it kind of fits this pilot stereotype that they're also both daredevils on the ground in terms of their cars. Murphy drives the Trans Am, and he's always doing that, driving around the cones thing at the police station. And Cochran has his Corvette, and we see that he drives fast too. There's just something about that these guys are always kind of pushing themselves to their limits in any kind of vehicle that feels really true to me. A lot of test pilots would have that same thing where they drive fast cars and they're a little reckless in their driving, and somehow it just fits. I love that.
It does. And yes, these two men, this is something they share, even though they're being portrayed as total opposites, this love of the slick automobile. And meanwhile, the Thor hitman assassin is riding around in the most beat up, dejected car you could possibly imagine still operating.
I can't remember which car Kate drives. They actually say it in the movie, but it's certainly not that stylish, but she does some amazing things with it.
The policeman refers to her as a den mother in a Vega.
I think that might have been, yeah, there you go.
That's actually one of my favorite lines.
Next, we'll move on to the icy government agents. Paul Roebling playing Iceland. Roebling also appeared in Prince of the City and A Piano for Mrs. Cimino and provided voices for Ken Burns' Civil War documentary, including his great-grandfather, Washington Roebling, who designed the Brooklyn Bridge. For years, I thought he was the guy who played the weird military uncle in Harold and Maude, but that was actually Charles Tyner. But something about their delivery is very similar. And something about Roebling in this part, he is really effectively creepy. He's like always trying to be friendly, like, Frank, smoke? Yeah, is it? And it goes horribly wrong, and he's always got this weird level of awkwardness behind his sort of attempts at diplomacy.
These are guys, I actually enjoy them more and more with each viewing. And like I mentioned, it's kind of like the minor characters from Hamlet.
Rosencrantz
and Guildenstern. They're like that. And they could get their own spin-off, and it would be wonderful. These two guys in their three-piece suit, very preppy, very Ivy League, which is for people who know about the CIA and know where they recruit their talent from. That is very fitting. Iceland seems to have like this vaguely New England accent. And I just get a big kick out of them for whatever reason.
Also, both these guys have terrible ties. Iceland has this really weird paisley fractal design on his. Fletcher has that terrible bow tie. They both look really silly. And Iceland has that bizarre trench coat that's like this shiny gray material. It looks like it belongs in the same class as Gene Hackman's coat from The Conversation. It just looks so awkward and weird. You couldn't, look more like a spy if you tried.
It reminds me of the most obnoxious sort of person you would meet in law school. And I think that Fletcher, who is the character with the mustache, his whole demeanor is part of what sets Katie off at the TV station. He cannot sell himself as an LA television guy because he just doesn't give that vibe off and doesn't look the part. So he raises her antennas.
Comparing them, Iceland, for some reason, it looks like a lot of times they made him up to look kind of sweaty and kind of greasy looking, and he's always a little awkward. Fletcher's a little more cool, and he always has these weird little phrases that he throws in, these little witticisms that I think he's a little bit more the one who's trying to look like cool and intelligent, like, no, I got this under control, where Iceland's a little more awkward and a little off. That's David Shiner playing Fletcher, who previously appeared as one of Oscar and Felix's poker buddies in The Odd Couple, Roy. He was also in The Greatest Story Ever Told, They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, and The Gong Show movie. Yeah, the two of them together as a match set is kind of amazing. And I wanted to bring up also the Pinkville thing, because I totally missed that reference, and you had to point out to me exactly what that is.
Yeah, people who see the Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War, I think, will hear about Pinkville. It was the slang that American soldiers used to describe the area where the My Lai massacre would eventually happen. And I'm not quite sure what it means. It may refer to the deep pro-communist sympathies in that area after the My Lai massacre. But yeah, if you search for Pinkville on Google, first thing will come up is My Lai massacre. And I don't think that would have been lost on the script writers. So it was sort of like the idea that these deep state conspirators have this twisted sort of G. Gordon Liddy type sense of humor, where they would name their facility after a notorious war crime.
I also love watching Fletcher and Iceland, that exchange where Iceland's like, what's the name of that place again? And Fletcher almost embarrassedly says, Pinkville. And Iceland kind of goes, oh, right. Yeah. Like they're a little embarrassed to admit that this is what this is called in front of these two cops. It's a really nice detail. Next, we move on to Anthony James as, they never say his name in the movie. I think it's pronounced Grundelius, the hitman. James is a familiar face for audiences. He usually plays heavies, and I hate to say it, but with his face like that look, I don't see how he couldn't. He's a scary looking guy, just naturally. He appeared in the Heat of the Night, Vanishing Point, High Plains Drifter. He did a lot of stuff with Clint Eastwood. Burnt Offerings, where he's famous as the really creepy chauffeur that haunts Oliver Reed. He kind of spoofed this role in Naked Gun 2.5 as a really awkward hitman. And he's Slim, the bartender guy in Unforgiven. There is one moment he does in this, and I don't know if it's intentional or not. When he runs over Lyman Good, he kind of opens his mouth and has this almost like thrilled kind of ha-ha expression that creeps me out every time I see this. Because most of the time he's very chill and kind of a cold assassin. That moment always creeps me out for some reason, like he's really enjoying running over Daniel Stern.
That stood out to me also, and I think it's a tremendous piece of acting.
It struck me harder than the car. Sorry.
Oof.
But it did. It made me very uncomfortable. And the idea that it wasn't just killing the character, it was murdering him in the most gleeful way possible. And we want that character to die after he kills him.
Yeah, and we never see what happens to him.
Right.
That's the thing. We assume he's arrested in the background, but we never actually get to see it. It's almost this weird orgasmic reaction to the impact. It's just like, ooh, oh, that's gross.
That was powerful. With a name like Grundilius, you would expect it to be said at least once in the script. It is not said in the movie. Kind of like Ewoks in Return of the Jedi. They're never actually called Ewoks on screen, I don't think. And then even in the written script, we are given his name parenthetically, but it is not put into any character's lines. And
it's interesting that while he sort of seems to be the muscle, a lot of times he is kind of deep in the councils of these government guys. He's the one who's talking to Holmes, who appears to be kind of the head of this whole operation near the end, trying to figure out what to do about the tape. So it seems like he's not just an assassin, but he is kind of operating a lot of this stuff. I started to put it in my head that he's the guy they sent into the barrios to stir up trouble. He is like the main agent doing that, while Iceland and Fletcher kind of keep their hands clean.
I can see that.
That makes a lot of sense, and it also might explain why they would have a person of such uneven talents on their assassination team, because this is kind of the gang that couldn't shoot straight. The operation at the councilwoman's home goes horribly and doesn't really even make a lick of sense. I don't know what they think they're going to achieve by taking this woman's notebook.
I don't know if she had actual hard evidence in that briefcase that we didn't get to see, and then it would just be allegations, or...
I felt like that was a missing piece as well. There was all this evidence. We're made to think that the evidence itself is what they're after, not killing what was she, a commissioner or...
City councilwoman.
City councilwoman. But we never hear what that paperwork is or what it meant. So it was just a dangling thread.
They said she had informants, so maybe it was the testimony of those informants or something. And then I wondered when he had that line about, if she hadn't yelled, it wouldn't have been necessary to rough her up. I wasn't sure if the yelling was a metaphorical thing of if she hadn't started shooting her mouth off about this, we wouldn't have had to kill her. Or if he literally meant if she hadn't yelled in the driveway at that particular moment, they wouldn't have had to kill her.
The latter is how I took it.
Yeah, that's how I took it initially, but I started to wonder if maybe he meant the former. That would make more sense, honestly.
It seemed to me, just watching the way the sequence was shot and unfolded, that they were not initially trying to kill her, but they were trying to retrieve the documents from her. If they were trying to kill her, it seemed like they would have just killed her and then searched the car.
That's true. That would have made it a lot smoother to just shoot her, grab the stuff, and go.
It seems like it was just a really unlucky shot that killed her during the shootout with police. And yeah, I cannot make any sense of this reasoning. There is this boss in the Operation Thor who was mentioned.
Mr. Holmes?
Mr. Holmes.
Yeah.
And he is unhappy with the fact that she was killed. So maybe they simply could not get him to cross the red line of killing her. And so they were trying to do something else, however suboptimal it was, to interfere with her work.
Maybe it's one of those things where they were going to get the names of her informants so they could rub them out, and therefore there's no witnesses, no actual testimony, nothing that you could actually use.
That is plausible, yeah.
But it's another, not a plot hole, but an unexplained thing that we kind of have to make excuses for.
It's a dropped thread.
Yeah. A lot of the plot of what the government guys are doing is kind of murky in the film. As a kid, it was fine for me. It's an excuse for us to have the helicopters shooting at each other in the air. I'm okay with that. I'll admit, watching it now, it sticks a little bit more. Let's move over to the news guys. James Murtaugh playing Alf Hewitt, who might be familiar from The Howling. He had a bit part as a library clerk in All the President's Men. John Carpenter's Someone's Watching Me, and he'd play Fred Phelps in The Laramie Project. And also, we previously saw him in another movie with Roy Scheider. He was the priest giving the eulogy in Romeo is Bleeding when Gary Oldman gets his toes cut off.
Oh.
Though you can barely see him there. I keep thinking he looks like Charles Grodin with bigger, crazier hair. We don't get much from him, but I kind of love the idea that when he stumbles on this story in the tape from Kate, he's less shocked about the implications of it, more like, oh, we have a cool story, and this story just got cooler. This is great. He's a little blasé with what's going on, I feel like.
Yeah, the media and the news portrayal of the movie are of interest. They're an artifact of the time. And he refers to Murphy as Horatius at the Bridge, which is a reference that I didn't get right off the bat, and I think most viewers wouldn't.
Yeah, I had to look it up where it was like a Roman army officer who held off Etruscan invaders at this bridge and eventually burned it so they couldn't get into Rome, and then took like a spear in the ass, literally, and jumped into the water, but managed to swim back to Rome and survive and became this hero. And this symbol of the one lone man fighting off the invading hordes, which he's kind of equating to Murphy here as this lone guy who's fighting this government conspiracy. So at the very least, he has an interesting sense of classical references. And then we have Mario Machado playing himself, who is probably pretty well known to people. He was a radio and TV newscaster on KHJ-TV and KNXT on the LA-based CBS broadcast. He was supposedly the first Chinese American on-air TV news reporter in LA and possibly nationwide. But most people would recognize him as the reporter in the RoboCop movies because he has just such great poise and delivery. Filmmakers are immediately like, oh yeah, let's get him to deliver the news in our film. He also played newsman in Oh God, Rocky 3, Scarface, and he played a non-reporter in St. Elmo's Fire. He's the businessman who Emilio Estevez destroys his house during a house party. But man, his crisp news delivery, his voice, it's so good. Getting an actual newsman to do that, it just makes all that stuff really believable.
If Blue Thunder was updated, it would be interesting to observe how an incident like this would be covered in the cable news era, with Fox News creating one narrative, MSNBCA creating another.
Also, it could play out in real time over something like Twitter, if Twitter still exists in a few days.
Right.
Yeah, you'd have this social media swelling for, hashtag Frank Murphy. Yeah, go Murphy, go. And the other one's like, hashtag air terrorist or something.
Right.
While we're talking about media, it might be worth noting that the featurette for this film opens with heavy emphasis on the idea of how scary it would be to have computers have all this knowledge about you. That's a lesser theme in the film itself. It's more about the weaponry and the audio-visual surveillance. But the script makes a point of having cutaway shots to microwave satellites that are beaming data to Blue Thunder when they're looking up the records of different people.
They were trying to do a lot of things. I still think they were trying to do too much in this film. If this had been a series, I would have loved to have seen them do a different take. You're laughing, why?
Because it was a series.
I meant a series of movies.
Oh, okay.
I did not mean a TV series. A motion picture.
Sorry, we'll get to the TV series later.
Thank
anyway,
you.
Sorry, but sorry very much.
That the series was not canonical with the movie, so I think you're talking about if there was a canonical series.
Right.
Well, if only he hadn't planted that helicopter in front of the damn train, maybe we could have had one.
Well, what I mean is, a lot like The Wire, another film could look at a different aspect of this same problem. So you wouldn't necessarily need the helicopter for each one of them.
That's valid. I can see that.
Yeah, I don't think most contemporary viewers would miss the fact that we all carry a little bit of Blue Thunder in our pockets with us
Yes, we
every day
do.
right now.
Yeah, Lyman Good looking up people on the internet. It's like he's Googling himself pretty much. And it's the original version of that. Yeah. And that's the thing. Nowadays, you could probably find a lot more about a person from what we have than what he had on that one little computer.
Exactly. He'd be using his phone once he ran out of resources from his government computers.
I was thinking about that with Murphy trying to use the operator to call people from the helicopter nowadays. Just boom, boom, boom. And the bad guys wouldn't have been able to track it as easily. Let's talk a little bit about the crew for the film. The movie was shot by cinematographer John A. Alonzo, who also shot movies as diverse as Harold and Maude, Chinatown that he got an Oscar nomination for, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Scarface, Star Trek Generations, and the live TV remake of Failsafe. And he chose to shoot a lot of scenes handheld, trying to sort of mimic the effect of a steady camera, but just himself without the equipment. And Badham would allow him a lot of latitude to shoot these. He'd just kind of, decide the coverage, decide what angles he wanted on certain actors during scenes. You can see it when Murphy and Cochran first meet on the training grounds, that it's shot handheld, and he kind of moves it around to frame them the way he sees fit. And it works. I mean, it kind of gives those scenes a nice energy to them that they might not have had ordinarily.
Badham's commentary talks about how they had new, smaller cameras that made possible the kind of filming that they were doing that wouldn't have been possible even 5 years earlier.
And apparently it was his idea during all of the night rear-projected helicopter scenes to actually get projectors with some of the same footage and shoot it onto the actors and the helicopter cockpit mock-up, so it looks like light's being reflected on them. And it's really effective. It's kind of surreal. It doesn't necessarily look realistic, but it really gives the impression of what's happening in a really cool way. And here we come to a slightly controversial bit of the movie, the music score by Arthur Rubinstein, which a lot of people don't like. I really dig it.
I didn't mind it, but it did remind me of the main theme from The Core so much. Every time it started to play, I was like, I want to watch The Core.
See, I've always had this theme stuck in my head for years, humming it. So now it makes me wonder if you thought it was, at one point you thought I was humming the Core theme. So
Then that's exactly what it is. I think the first 6 notes, either resembling it closely or exact.
I know electronic scores get a lot of stick for being their very 80s style, but I mean, there's a couple composers who I think were really good at it, especially in the 80s. Jerry Goldsmith, he was big into that. Wendy Carlos, she's amazing.
She kind of wrote the book on it.
And Rubinstein, I think he does a really good job. I mean, after this, he would go on to work with Badham again on War Games, and his score for that movie is fantastic. And I like how he combines synthesizers with brass, percussion, string pieces. Like the opening theme of the movie sounds much more orchestral. And then as we get further into the film and Blue Thunder becomes more of a presence and the technology takes over, it becomes a lot more electronic. And I think that subtlety is really kind of cool.
Yes, I think that the music was a net positive to the film. I mean, obviously, if you can get John Williams to score your movie, you're going to do that. But John Williams can't score every movie. It might have been interesting to hear what a composer like Michael Small would do. He did some of the paranoid conspiracy thrillers of the 1970s. And
I was thinking I can imagine James Horner knocking out a really good score for this. It would probably sound like some of his other scores, but I'm okay with that because those are all great scores. One particular music note I have to mention, the first appearance of Blue Thunder, that amazing shot where it's coming in from the sunrise. I love how you get this fanfare, and it almost sounds kind of heroic until it feels like it resolves wrong on purpose. It's like it becomes a little sinister and creepy. And then we hear that theme, that little fanfare, repeated later when Murphy's in the helicopter, and there it's allowed to sound heroic. There it resolves properly the way it should as a big hero theme. And I thought that's a really subtle touch that, well, Blue Thunder is scary when these guys have it. When Murphy has it, now it's okay. Now we can be impressed by it and enjoy it.
I love that sort of sonic storytelling.
It's really, really good. And he'd do weird stuff. He put like a microphone inside a glass bottle and put it beneath a grand piano for certain sounds, and he'd actually mixed in altered samples of helicopter blades into the soundtrack and put it into the music, which I think is cool. Yeah, some good stuff. And Badham and the other filmmakers, they didn't even get to hear the score until they were mixing War Games. So they were kind of in the dark as to whether it was going to work or not. And not everybody liked it. The editor, Frank Morris, hated the score and was trying to get them to take it out. But it was used as a lot of temp tracks in other movies, and it got Rubinstein a lot of work. And true to that idea of the orchestral being a little bit more human, the technology being more synthesizer, the end theme was originally different. It was the same theme, but it was done in this quieter sort of piano-based theme that kind of suggested Murphy victorious. And for whatever reason, they took it out and went for the technological synthesizer one, which is catchy as hell. But I do kind of like the idea of the piano theme, which is on the soundtrack. You can actually hear it being used instead. I'm
sure a study could be made just on the topic of movies that have had very different scores made for them. I think 2001 was one of those movies.
Alex North did a whole score that got taken out. It's happened to Jerry Goldsmith a bunch of times. His score from Legend was gotten rid of. His score for Alien was heavily messed with, sometimes with pieces of his own from other soundtracks like Freud. So it happens a lot. And I guess there are pieces you can hear on the soundtrack, other ones that the editor didn't like and they took out and they didn't use. But I like the score. I do have the soundtrack. It's pretty nice. And speaking of the editing, the movie was edited by Edward Abrams and Frank Morris. Now, 500,000 feet of film was shot, and a lot of these scenes, especially all the aerial stuff, was shot with 6 different cameras at the same time. So you can imagine these guys had a lot of stuff to get through, and they do a superb job of cutting it together into something that's watchable. I think particularly of the chase scene in the reservoir. That's an amazing scene. And just looking at how they cut it together and make it coherent and make the continuity of it work with what is probably just a lot of bits and pieces. Helicopter would probably fly by. You'd have like 2 seconds, and then you'd have to figure out where to put that in the film. They do a stunning job.
Nowadays, because of drone footage, they can put absolutely amazing aerial footage in any cheap Netflix documentary.
Yes.
But at the time, this was an extraordinary labor. And I'm just utterly transported by it. All that daytime footage, nighttime footage of Los Angeles in the 1980s. I could watch just a featurette of that footage.
Kind of reminds me of the stuff Michael Mann does in terms of just making LA sparkle and look almost weirdly magical at night. Yeah. And because the helicopter, the way they designed it was really heavy, it couldn't actually take off and land and maneuver as well as they wanted. So the editing had to cover a lot of that. You can see some shots where the footage has been subtly speeded up to make the helicopter look like it's moving faster. And it doesn't jump out as much as it should. It actually still works really well. And one of the editors, Morris, he actually did double duty. He also provided the voice for the F-16 pilot, who I love the fact he calls his partner Cookie. I have it in my head these two guys are a couple, and they go into battle together, and it's really sweet, and I like that they both survive. All right, let's talk about the title character of the movie, The Special. So, putting this together, the filmmakers investigated every type of helicopter, and they kept seeing these really sleek, cool-looking ones, like the Jetstar one we see in the movie. And Badham decided he wanted something really ugly and warlike. So the production designer, Philip Harrison, recommended a French helicopter known as an aerospatial Alouette. And they put in this sort of Apache-style cockpit canopy. And they had this idea that if this thing is going to use armored glass, and you can't really carve armored glass, it would have to have this weird, faceted canopy on it that makes it look like a bug, and that's great. And they threw all these weird things on the side and the cannon in the front and everything they could to make it just look big and threatening and ugly looking. The problem is it also made it really, really heavy and hard to fly, and it had to be approved by the FAA before they could use it, so they had a lot of trouble with that. They also had to put lights on it because when they tried to shoot it at night, the damn thing just disappeared.
I think the image of Blue Thunder is just a tremendous piece of prop work. I rank it up there with the Millennium Falcon and other iconic vehicles. And it was used in some non-Blue Thunder productions. And I feel like it could have been slipped into a lot of things, like in the Robbie the Robot of the 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they had allowed it. But its appearances outside of the franchise were limited.
Yeah, it showed up in an episode of MacGyver. It was repainted to look like a Soviet helicopter in the miniseries America. After this, one of them was sold for parts and the other one was scrapped. And there was a third version, this mock-up that they used for the close-ups, that you used to be able to see on display at Walt Disney World. It was on the Hollywood Studios tour. And apparently they got rid of that in 2009. I've seen pictures of it. It was like deteriorating. Man, I would have given anything just to have a chance to, be on that tour and just see Blue Thunder going by. It's so... Yeah, that just seeing that silhouette against the sky and that it looks so giant and huge and it looks like it shouldn't fly at all. And yet seeing it sweeping through the sky like that, it's really impressive.
Oh, do we know if this still exists or where it's stored?
No, it's been scrapped. Pretty much all of the original Blue Thunders are gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, for something that, had such a narrow band of exposure, people know this image if you mention it. If you mention Blue Thunder to somebody, even if they haven't seen the movie or something, they know what you're talking about. And I think I even have the Matchbox type car.
I was going to say
toy.
Matchbox took one. Yeah, they made one too. Yeah. And used that design for other helicopters. They just painted different colors and there you go. But that weird faceted canopy is there. Yeah.
I don't know if I should float my pet theory.
Go for it.
Do it.
I love theories.
Yes, we're all about pet theories here.
I feel like Blue Thunder is such a pristine sort of techno-thriller because the helicopter becomes a character almost, and perhaps the main character. And it's a completely inanimate object. It's not a King Kong monster. It's not a robot like the Terminator. I mean, it has no mind and no voice, and yet we care about what it's going to do, what's going to happen to it. And ultimately its fate is that of Old Yeller. Faithfully and dutifully serves its master. It thwarts the threat, stops the bad guys, and then in the end it has to be destroyed because there's no other choice.
It's the T-800 in Terminator 2.
It's funny because there's a couple shots where it does really feel personified. That moment when Cochran looks out the window to see it just hovering there, it almost looks like the helicopter's like, ha, I caught ya.
How could he not have heard it, though?
It had whisper mode going.
It is not that quiet of a main character.
Whisper mode. Whisper.
Sure.
They told us it's quiet, therefore it's quiet. Go with it.
Sure.
No, you're right about the actress should have heard this helicopter out her window, though. That's definitely the case since they didn't have whisper mode.
Whisper mode.
See, you just give it a cool name and you can get away with so many sins.
Badham made a little commentary about this on the features, and I think whisper mode was the thing they were taking the most liberties with. He was commenting, I think, around 2005, and he was saying they do kind of have that on some experimental helicopters now. But I don't think there was anything like that in 1983. We should probably also tell people that Nordock armor is not a real armor.
I was wondering about that. That opening thing about, this technology is in use in the military today. It should have been ... mostly ... kind of.
Exactly. Another point on that. In the script, there is the real helicopter technology of a mast periscope, which helicopters use to hide behind trees and see over them. But that was dropped in the shot movie.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it would have looked visually to see it used this way. I thought it was kind of a cool idea, especially when he's hiding from the jets, but it might have looked a little silly, like a submarine movie all of a sudden.
Yeah, or just hard to film, just hard to convey on screen.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the effects. This movie was the first film for the legendary effects company DreamQuest Images, who stepped in after the first effects company failed to produce any of the jet fighter attack scenes. And the FX scenes that we see in the movie, they're literally off-the-shelf model kits that model maker Greg Jean put together. He literally bought something in a toy store, put it together, and made it work for the movie. And that's kind of incredible. And they shot the model scenes a little differently. They didn't use blue screen. They shot them against black with ultraviolet coating. And then they shot it again with black and white film and lit it with ultraviolet light so it made the model glow. And then they could just shoot the mats without blue screen. And as a result, the composites are really clean. They don't have that weird edge or block mats that you sometimes see with blue screen. There's like one shot where you can see the tail of one of the F-16s is a wee bit transparent. But otherwise, I think a lot of the effects work holds up really well, even today. In addition to that, they had a little radio control Blue Thunder they'd use for some scenes, like when the chopper is dodging the heat-seeking missiles in front of the building or the climactic loop. And I gotta say, it actually looks really convincing. They do a good job putting it in slow motion to make it look like it has the mass it should. I wouldn't have known the difference, honestly, if it hadn't been pointed out to me. There's also the thermograph shots. As in Predator, they couldn't shoot with an actual thermographic camera. It just wouldn't look right. So in that scene, they have all the actors on a black stage wearing white with white makeup and just took that footage, put it through video processing and color correction, and made it look kind of like what a thermograph would look like. I just have this image now of Malcolm McDowell just completely whited out in white clothes and white makeup and how weird that must have looked. I feel like it's one of those things that real thermograph probably wouldn't have been as dramatically satisfying.
Yeah, the special effects work still carries through to this day. And, a movie's special effects are either going to become very dated, and we all know movies like that, or like, for instance, Blade Runner. They just seem to hold up, and they still look like the future.
These held up pretty much fully. I did have a problem with the thermograph because we could render something a lot cleaner these days. It doesn't have to be that blocky. When I saw the imagery that it had, it didn't make sense. Like the heat was on the wrong spots sometimes, and that was very distracting for me. Otherwise, all of these special effects held up. Mainly because they were practical.
Yeah, that's the thing. The fact that you can actually mix in a couple model shots and composite shots with real life stunts. If you're shooting the real thing and then all of a sudden you see an effect shot, most of the time your brain goes, oh, that's not real.
Right.
And that they hold up as well as they do is a sign of good effects work. And you're right, on the thermograph, now we know from experience that it would be a lot more rainbow colored, not just all these kind of basically white figures.
Right.
It looks like all those government agents are burning hot in that scene.
Yeah, I think the most famous thermographic images probably are in the Predator movies.
Yes, definitely.
Take for granted.
And even those had to be kind of faked because they were in a really hot jungle, so it wouldn't work very well. All right, shall I move into some trivia?
Do it.
The LAPD Aerial Division cooperated as long as their group was renamed for the movie, which is why it's referred to as the Astro Division in the film, with those stylish patches. I've actually seen you can buy those on eBay. I might get one just for kicks.
I saw the same thing on the commentary, and so I was surprised when I looked up LAPD and saw Astro Division on their website.
Maybe they've named it after this movie. Maybe they're like, okay, the movie did well for us PR-wise. Yeah, sure, we're the Astro Division now. Yeah, that's it.
Conceivable. It's actually two divisions. They have this Astro Division, which they call the patrol car in the sky. And then they have another division, a special division, which supports undercover work. That's how it's described on their own website.
The Astro Division headquarters was shot at the Piper Technical Center, the real-life home of the LAPD Helicopter Division, but it actually wasn't operational at the time of filming, so the offices and control room and ready room that we see in the movie were actually sets built for the filming. And then because they weren't really constructed for actual use, they tore them down, and the LAPD put their own actual tower on there. But all those scenes are actually sets. It looks really realistic. They did a great job with it.
It would also have to be the setting of what is referred to in the script but not shown on screen is Murphy's wig out, the thing that caused his friend to change shifts. was when he was trying to respond to a building fire and tried to rescue a man on the roof, but he wasn't able to get to the man in time. The man jumped off. And this was another image that triggered his post-traumatic flashbacks. And when he returned after that flight, some of the officers were making jokes about the whole situation, and that he tore up the prep room because he got so angry about having botched that rescue.
I wish they'd included that. I know that they gave reference to it, but I would have liked to have known this is a very severe ongoing issue that his superiors are aware of.
And there's even that veiled reference to Laguna Beach, that he was on leave somewhere, recuperating from this or getting some leave time, that Kate makes several times. Several other people make it during the movie, that you kind of piece together that this was big enough that they're like, all right, you better go somewhere and get your head straight before you come back.
Yeah, it's all very indirect in the final product, but they're referring to him having a freak out. One character says that Dr. So-and-so wanted to ground him, and that's a reference to a cut scene.
It's interesting to know, I remember seeing this on regular TV, and the whole scene where Murphy and Lyman Good are spying on the nude actress was actually shot with alternate footage of her wearing a bathing suit. I remember when I was a kid being like, how are they going to handle this on regular TV? Like, oh, that's how. They just shot a second version. And apparently while they were shooting that scene, the actress's boyfriend was like hiding in the corner of the set, supervising basically to make sure that, nobody messed with her. I think he was just sort of the jealous type.
Yeah, that sounds more like jealousy than anything else. I mean, she did, and the filmmakers, I'm assuming they blocked some of this out for her. The fig leafing was just spectacular. She's contorting in positions that should leave her very, very exposed, but she's very carefully with her arms or her hair. She's fig leafing the whole time, and it's not breaking the fluidity of her movement.
And it's aided by the fact that they keep cutting to the wide shot where that camera might have gotten a little too close in a couple of those shots. It's very well coordinated, yeah. The car that runs down Lyman Good was actually driven by stunt driver Carrie Lofton, who, if you don't know his name, he might be familiar from doing the stunt driving in Bullet, Christine, Maximum Overdrive, and he was actually the real person playing the killer truck driver from Duel. So if you're going to get somebody to run somebody down, you get the best. Now, I mentioned earlier, during one scene, Scheider is actually flying Blue Thunder. It's during that climactic shot of Murphy flying at sunset. They had a cameraman named Frank Holgate who made this weird sort of contraption so he could strap onto the side of the helicopter and film through it so he could film Roy Scheider in the chopper with the background. The problem is this time, the thing that kind of had him strapped in actually started to come undone, and the real pilot had to reach out the window, grab the cameraman, and hold on to him so he wouldn't fall, and basically had to turn the controls over to Scheider for a little bit. So during that scene, he is actually flying that helicopter. For the destruction of the barbecue chicken shack, when you see all the chickens falling on the ground, those are actual cooked chickens. They discovered that if they got fake ones, it would cost more than to get actual chickens and just shoot them in the air and drop them on the ground, so they did it. And it turns out the homeless LA residents swarmed over to help clean up the chickens.
Wow. My initial thought is that is a disgusting excess of food waste. And then I'm even more grossed out that they allowed all of this edible food, not spoiled or expired, to fall to the ground and just allow other people to pick it up and eat it when it's been on the ground. That feels like degradation.
That's
in a way. I'm just not thrilled with that at all. Also, while filming that scene, the explosion was hot enough to melt the matte box of the effects camera that was shooting it, so it was a little bigger than they thought it was going to be. Sharp-eyed viewers may note that Diana McNeely's house, it was shot on the Warner Brothers backlot. It's the same house used for the Murtaugh house in the Lethal Weapon movies, and was also in Christmas Vacation as well. John Badham said that military supply companies offered to supply the production with thousands of rounds of live ammunition. Badham and the production politely declined. That's just creepy. Here, take these bullets, use them, have fun. Well, I'm not sure how much the military supply companies have connection with NRA or where NRA was in its development at that time, but it does not surprise me that they were offered live rounds.
Yeah, it's like, no, I mean, God, it's creepy. All right, as for the legacy of the movie, it did inspire a short-lived TV show. It was only like 11 episodes, starring James Farentino as pretty much a Murphy character, except instead of Vietnam trauma, he's just a guy who plays by his own rules. And Dana Carvey in the comic relief sidekick Lyman Good role. It also had Dick Butkus and Bubba Smith. They were like these guys who support the helicopter in Rolling Thunder, a van that has a lot of other technical stuff. It's a network TV show. What is interesting is that they took a lot of the alternate angles not used for the film and used those to pad out some of the action scenes in the episodes. The first episode has them basically doing the test range scene again using different angles, and it's kind of interesting.
Yes, I did see that part of the first episode, and they actually do a little bit of a better job by explaining the helicopter surveillance capabilities.
Yeah, that was really cool, where it's like can zoom in and read something, and then he has somebody whisper something to somebody, and the microphones can pick up. I kind of wish they had done that in the feature film. It was kind of cool.
I think it's pretty clearly that this was inspired by the A-Team. It has very much an A-Team vibe.
And at the same time, you had Airwolf, and the competition from that kind of led to this show being canceled. I never actually watched Airwolf. I know it's kind of the same thing. It's more of a government-controlled chopper doing espionage missions and stuff. I just never really caught it. It wasn't really in my sphere at the time.
Well, this is back in a time when we didn't have DVR. I mean, as a high school boy, I definitely would have DVR'd every episode of Blue Thunder and Airwolf if that technology had been available to me.
I definitely would have watched Blue Thunder if I had known about it at the time, yeah. It inspired a video game adaptation for the Action Max game system in 1984, and as I mentioned, it was a definite influence on Thunderblade. And a remake is in development, which supposedly would change the title machine to a drone and focus on drone technology, which I think there are ways to do that. I'd still rather see somebody do a more straight adaptation of O'Bannon and Jacoby's original screenplay. I want to see that, because that would be really risky and interesting, I think.
Yeah. Are they talking about another feature film or a series?
Yeah, supposedly it's supposed to be another feature. I don't know what development it's in now. This was years ago they've been talking about doing it as a drone film, but I mean, it's a valid property. It's a recognizable name. I don't know if it would be the same without that particular helicopter flying around. I mean, it's such an, like you said, an iconic image. I don't know.
I can't imagine they would come up with a drone that would be as impressive, but as using a newer and more advanced technology for surveillance and control goes, drone would be the one to go with at this point.
If you're making it more of a threat, I think it would work really well. If it's not as exciting if you don't have somebody in the vehicle actually in danger.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical rewrite to take the pilot out of the vehicle and just have a drone in the sky.
Okay, now what's everybody's favorite scene?
My favorite scene is Kate's car ride chase with the tape. I love how she moved. I could tell the actress was in the chair for a lot of it. Some of those stunts were so scary, and I felt the adrenaline going as the car. I just love car chases anyway, so that might be more me. But I did really love that.
There is in the script, and it was filmed at substantial expense, a scene in which Katie pulls off an impressive driving stunt when she's cornered by the police. They removed that scene and said that test audiences didn't like it because it seemed too over the top. And yet it sounds like it was substantially less of a challenge to our sense of disbelief than Murphy doing a loop-de-loop with a helicopter that he characterizes as being more nose-heavy than the Ayatollah, to quote him directly. But, I guess that was how things stood in Hollywood at the time.
Yeah, I guess it was the Diamonds Are Forever move where the car pops into two wheels and gets around an obstacle, which, after seeing how ridiculous it looked in that movie, I don't blame them for cutting it. All right, Gabe?
I think that my favorite scene might be a subsection of what you're talking about. I specifically enjoy that shot where Murphy cuts in half a patrol car to enable Katie to escape and get to the TV studio. I think it was meant to be a crowd pleaser and an audience pleaser. And it was obviously very difficult to do technically. And they pulled it off and just made it shocking and funny and hilarious.
That shot of just the helicopter rising up behind them on the bridge, it was like one of the big selling points of the trailer, that shot. It's such an amazing shot.
It's almost like Jaws coming out of the water.
Yeah. And it was like shot, 1,000 feet away with this 1,000mm lens, and it makes the thing look so huge. For me, I think I have to go with the main chase scene between Cochran and Murphy, where they're just cruising around between the buildings, because there's so much of that just gives me chills in terms of how risky it looks. It looks like they're over actual traffic. They're really low flying between these buildings. Also, it just gave me this warm nostalgic tingle to playing Thunderblade, because that's what a lot of that game is flying this helicopter between these buildings and trying to shoot bad guys. And it just stuns me every time I see it. Some of the whipping around and the turns they do around those, in those, canyons of buildings over the street. It's hairy as anything. It's incredible.
I like that the Cecil Hotel which recently was made infamous on a Netflix documentary.
Yes.
Like say, blink and you'll miss it cameo
I
during
totally
that sequence.
missed that.
Oh, I saw it.
Okay, recommendations. If somebody likes this movie, what's another one you think they'd like?
My non-serious, I guess, suggestion is The Core, only because I will never be able to watch this movie without thinking about The Core. And more seriously, Enemy of the State. It's another surveillance, government, conspiracies, chasing. And while our main character is not a part of the military or the government, the implications of what he has on him are world-changing.
That's a really good one. And it has that same idea of prototype technology being used for nefarious purposes.
Plus, it's just fun. If you just want to watch something fun, here you go. If you want to read deeper into it, go ahead.
Because Blue Thunder sits at the intersection of so many genres and subgenres, it's hard to pick. You know, you could be looking at this as a police movie, as a conspiracy thriller, as an action thriller, and each of those would cause you to make a different recommendation. But in keeping with the idea that this is a premier techno-thriller, the movie that I think would be a good peer for it in that genre is Capricorn 1.
Ooh, good one.
And I won't say anything to spoil that, but if you liked the major elements of Blue Thunder, you will find those elements also in Capricorn 1, but being done in a completely different way from different angles, and but with equal thrills.
Okay, I have two. One that's a little tenuous, but it's kind of tied to my childhood. When I first saw this movie and taped it onto a tape, there were two movies right next to each other. You had Blue Thunder, and the next one on the tape was FX. And I feel like that movie has some of the same vibe. That has that same conspiracy thriller tenor to it, with Brian Brown, who almost was Cochran, playing an effects guy who's hired by the government to fake the assassination of a government witness. And then midway through it, he starts to realize, maybe I'm not faking this. Maybe this is for real, and these guys are trying to betray me. As a techno-thriller in that case, it's actually special effects technology that's being used. And it is kind of neat from that point of view to see how effects guys actually do this stuff, to do like bullet hits and gunshots and squibs and explosions. But it just has some of that same sort of, you know, one little guy fighting this government conspiracy vibe that this one does. The other one is a more recent movie, Andrew Nichols' Good Kill, starring Ethan Hawke as a Air Force drone operator working in Afghanistan who's, like Murphy, he's starting to feel the psychological effects of some of the horrible stuff he has to do with this technology. A lot of the way the drone strikes and surveillance scenes are shot remind me a lot of Blue Thunder. And if they did a Blue Thunder movie as a drone film, I think they could take a lot from that film. It's very, very good. Okay, anything else to say about Blue Thunder?
No, I just found it thoroughly enjoyable.
I would just make the point that this movie is worth seeing because this is not the Star Wars Death Star scene at the end where everything is being shot with models and scaled down and, you know, moving cameras. This is actual helicopters being put to use. And however you think of it in terms of higher artistic terms, it's a cinematic accomplishment.
And one we're probably not likely to see done this way again. That ends the conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Blue Thunder or feel that we've missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page or follow us on Instagram under CinemaSpection. Our show is available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Amazon Music, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe, and if you have a moment, please leave us a review there. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We're also now part of the Fireside Alliance podcast network. Check out some of the other great shows in the network at www.firesidealliance.com and join our Discord. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening. Remember to keep watching closely. There is more to a movie than what's on the screen. Catch you later.